Gentlemen, it's 5:30, so we'll start this meeting of the Salt Lake City Planning Commission today, July 26, 2023. We'll read the opening statement. The Planning Commission consists of residents from each Salt Lake City district that are appointed in a manner providing balanced geographic, professional, neighborhood, and community interest representation. The Planning Commission reviews and acts on any changes to the city's general plans, small area plans, special studies, zoning ordinances, and zoning district maps. The Commission also reviews and acts on planned unit developments, conditional uses, and certain subdivisions. Our goal is to provide a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We ask that those in attendance adhere to a few ground rules. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. And when we get to the public hearing portion, please respect the person speaking, don't interrupt, intimidate, no jeering, clapping, shouting, or other actions that might discourage people who have different opinions from participating. People who attempt to diminish someone else's input may be removed from the room. I'll go over the rest of this when we get to the public hearing portion. So right now we'll start with the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Can I get a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I have a motion by Commissioner Carlson.
Christensen.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. My second from Commissioner Tuttle. Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
I'll abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So the minutes are approved from the last meeting. The chair has nothing to report. Does the vice chair have anything?
The vice chair has nothing to report.
Director today.
Yes, a few items to recap from last week's city council meeting. Just wanted to give you an update. At the formal meeting, there were 3 to 4 private rezone petitions. And there was also, the city council passed those, and they also adopted a text amendment for non-conforming signs. Some of the briefings that they held earlier in the day included a briefing on the new form-based UN3 zoning district, which would be for the Fleet Block. And they discussed the rezoning of the Fleet Block. They also discussed the amendment to remove drive-throughs in the Sugar House area, an amendment to regarding site distance triangles at intersections. That's a zoning code amendment. And then there was a private rezoning petition that was also briefed. So just wanted to give you a recap of what happened last week at the city council.
So those were all briefings and none of those were voted on?
These non-conforming signs were voted on and adopted.
Okay, thank you. Now's our open forum time. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up and discuss? Andrew?
Yeah, Madam Chair. Thanks. I've been thinking about the TSA zones, and I'm wondering if we can do better on ground floor activation in the TSA zones. And I think about this in the context of Ballpark because, you know, I think we've had a lot of proposals along the 400 South corridor where we haven't been super happy with the ground floor activation. And you all know, I hate to impose additional costs on housing developments, but I feel like with zero, so as you all know, we have no parking at all required in the TSA zones, and I'd like to have businesses that people can walk to in the TSA zones, and I don't know whether there's something we can do to sort of improve that ground floor activation requirement in the TSA zones.
Maybe we can ask staff to start looking into like how those things have, what some of the statistics are from the TSA zone.
We're actually already looking into amending the TSA zones. Just acknowledging that there are some issues with the point-based system. So we have a couple staff members working on that research, and you should see potentially a petition initiated within the next 2 months, I'm hoping.
I think I have to agree with Commissioner Gantt, though. I think that, fitness rooms and rental offices and, mail rooms are not really ground floor activation. And I think that sometimes we have to think of coffee shops and other things as amenities rather than as rental space. And so I think we need to start, that is something that has been proposed in planning circles around the country. So I think it's really important that when somebody says, well, they can't pay the rent. Well, yeah, neither does the mailroom pay the rent. So these things are amenities that ought to be seriously considered.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way with the point system, if they can show a retail tenant lease that, and I don't care what the rent is, I don't care if it's half the going market rate of the retail rents, that to me would be a lot of points, that they have a strong interest, they have some sense that they have a tenant committed to that space that would actually be retail space. That to me would be something we give a lot of points, especially if it's a long-term lease. If it's like a 5-year lease, that would be really helpful.
And I think that's a great idea, but sometimes their planning is so far out to actually have a lease for a space that's not going to be built for 2 years. It might be a little hard to get somebody to commit on that.
Well, I think that the point system can reflect the comments of Brenda that you get less points if you're just having a gym for your residents or, a bike storage or the mailroom, because none of those are, I've said this long before, so maybe they get a higher point system if they're actually doing a retail space. Less to 0 points if they're just like, yeah, we're going to put the gym on the floor. Ground floor.
Okay. I think staff is working on that. So is there anything else you want to bring up? Okay, then we'll jump right into the regular agenda. So our first item up is the 9th East Mixed Use Multifamily Design Review, PLN PCM 2023-00354. Sarah, take it away. You'll have to get the mic on.
There we go. I
There
think
you
that's
go.
good. Thank you, Chair. So this is the 9th East Mixed Use and Multifamily Design Review Project. So the request includes design review for modifications to the standards to construct a new mixed-use development. There are 2 requests. The first is for the maximum length of a street-facing facade, and then the second is for the percentage of glass on the ground floor on the 900 East street-facing elevation. And you can see in the aerial photo here, the project is located on the west side of 900 East and then on the south side of 400 South. It's immediately south of the track station there. It's where the current Office Max is located. And then Salt Lake Roasting is located immediately to the west. Bennion Elementary is to the south, and then there are various commercial buildings to the north and also to the east. And staff is recommending approval of the proposal with conditions. To give you an overview of the project, the property is located in the TSA UNC zoning district. So that's the transit station area urban neighborhood core. It's within the Central Community Master Plan. The property is nearly 2 acres. There are 264 residential units proposed and nearly 16,000 square feet of commercial space. The exterior materials on the street-facing facade are glass, brick, fiber cement panels, and metal. And then there are 319 parking stalls proposed for the residential and commercial uses. And I should also point out, or I can also point out, that this was a project that the Planning Commission previously reviewed and approved in 2021, and that approval has expired, so they're back again with a new project number. There have only been a few changes to the proposal since then, though. So the applicable standards of review are the TSA zoning district standards, the 21A37 design standards, and then the design review standards in 21A59. Here are some existing conditions of the site. The first photo on the upper left shows the Office Max and the existing service parking lot. The photo on the upper right is looking east along 400 South, and you can see the parking lot as well as 400 South and the track station. And then on the bottom left is the Salt Lake Roasting and then the existing Office Max building. These two are very close to each other, and this will actually increase as far as the distance with the new construction. And then the final photo on the bottom right shows Office Max as well as the access drive to Bennion Elementary that's to the south. One of the unique aspects of this proposal is that there is an existing Jordan and Salt Lake Canal that runs through the site. And you can see that in a storm drain that runs diagonally across the property. And one aspect of this proposal is to relocate that to the southern and western perimeter of the site. And there would be an easement where that is located. As far as elevations, the north elevation along 400 South is the top image here. And one of the things that staff worked with the applicant on with the first review is that in several locations, the entries are at grade. There is somewhat of a grade change as you move across the site from east to west. So there are several locations where you can enter the building at grade on the site. And then the bottom shows the south elevation, which is what would face Bennion Elementary and the other areas. On the second floor plan, you can see that there are a few areas where the building is recessed. There's two that are on the area that faces 400 South, and then one to the rear. And the other elevations, the east elevation on the top there along 900 East, and then the west elevation where it would abut Salt Lake Roasting, and then on the left there you can see the grade change as the property goes from east to west. So as far as the requested modifications, the first is for the maximum length of the street-facing facade, and this is limited to 200 feet by right, and the proposed building is 434 feet, and staff is recommending approval of this request. You can see in the graphic provided by the applicant, what they've shown is how the building is broken up into 4 different massing sections, and these have a change in the building plane. And then you can also see those 2 recessed areas that are amenity areas that are located above the first floor there. And then the second request is for ground floor glass on the 900 East elevation. The requirement is that they have a minimum of 60% glass between 3 and 8 feet above grade, and 40% is proposed. And staff is also recommending approval of this request. On this elevation on the corner of 400 South and 900 East, there's a proposed restaurant, and then there are other entrances to the building and the facilities, as well as a second entrance to the parking garage and other kind of back of house elements that staff's position is that these are better located on this 900 East facade rather than on 400 South. as far as compliance with the city's adopted plans, looking at Plan Salt Lake, there were 2 principles that staff found it was compatible with, and those are on the slide. There were a number of initiatives within the Central Community Master Plan that were also applicable. I've included 4 of those here. Significantly, one is that it promotes the infill and redevelopment of underutilized land. It's also an example of a transit-oriented development, and it provides a mix of land uses with the multifamily housing and the first floor commercial and retail spaces. And it also provides spaces for people to gather and meet with that combination of the mix of uses as well as its location adjacent to tracks. As far as the public process, notice was provided to the community council and nearby property owners. An online open house was held. Planning staff and the applicant attended the community council meeting in June, and we also have received several comments on the proposal, and these are included in attachment E of the staff report. And so staff's recommendation is for approval with the conditions on the slide and in this report. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Okay, any questions right this second for Sarah? Is your applicant here?
Yes, he is here and they have a presentation.
Okay, have him come up and introduce themselves.
Good evening.
You need to get that mic close to you and make sure it's on.
Green. Can you hear me?
Why don't you try that? Can you move it? Can you move it closer to you? There you go.
There we go. Jeff Byers, Principal Architect, Richardson Design Partnership Architects. 510 South, 600 East is our office address. Some of you were on the commission at that time. We did it via Zoom because we were right smack in the middle of COVID. And we talked about a lot of the items with this project, which we can go over this evening. It was approved. We got an extension a year after we had it approved because the economy, COVID conditions prevented us from being able to develop the property. And doggone it, we forgot to extend it this last year to get another extension. Client is still very close to getting his financing nailed down. The economy is still a little, many of our clients are just wanting to break ground in the fall or the spring of next year, presidential year. So we're seeking basically the same approval that we received before in 21. The one thing I want to highlight, and I think it was you, Amy, and Brenda, that had a lot of questions and comments, and earlier this comment also about trying to activate that space. And unfortunate, most of our space activation is covered on the screen here, but we want the same thing, and we want to enhance that pedestrian experience. We want to create a draw that draws people into the retail spaces along there. I can understand the intent of the zoning ordinance with projects that have previously happened on 4 South. Basically, what I call a Great Wall of China of a building with glass that has the intent, but with parking structure behind the glass. And with our proposed project, we are really truly getting retail lined up for that ground level space. And we see that, I think we had, an 11-foot change of grade, which is very surprising when you look at that property, to use it to our advantage to create little pockets of in and out where people can shop and sit and on the patio and eat and mingle and hang out. Such a great location next to the track stop. So that was something that was really questioned last time we presented. I want to emphasize that's something that's still very important to us. The other item is the breaking up of the facade. We also want the facade broken up. And we kept that ground level somewhat continuous. Where we broke it up is at the higher elevation in creating our amenity decks that face 4 South. So we have 2 amenity break decks there. There's a great shot of it. that breaks up that facade along 4 South to try and break up that massing so we don't have a big blob of a building going along 4 South there. That's important to us. We've got different, just for your information, different nodes of activity with those amenity decks. The one facing the elementary south will have a pool deck. The other two will be what we call facing 4 South, a little bit more quiet space, exercise area, and lounge area. There was a comment last time to, if you can get the cursor on that, Adam, that middle one to set the deck further back in, which we did, and we've got that to Sarah. Any other questions or comments, thoughts?
How far did you set back the deck?
30 feet.
And that's not shown here, right?
And this graphic has not been updated, but
I was just going to jump to the
show her the
floor
one
plan
that,
here.
yeah,
Oh, there it is.
there, right there.
Okay, thank you. And there's a parking, that's where the parking entrance is.
That's where the parking entrance is
And there's an alternative parking entrance somewhere else, right?
on 9th East.
Okay, okay, around the corner. Okay.
And parking, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but the zoning ordinance has actually changed where you've actually increased the amount of parking. Is that correct?
The allowable,
The allowable
it's almost doubled as
parking
far
for
as
this
what's allowed
area.
now.
And we've kept the same parking count, which is barely 1 stall per unit. So we're, right?
Yep, so one stall per unit plus the additional for the retail,
For the
another
retail.
55 stalls for the retail.
So we've kept it at a minimum.
And how will the retail stalls be accessed? And how will retail customers know that they're there?
The retail access is going to come off of primarily 4 South, so there will be signage there. Show that rendering. It's got that signage.
The rendering, or that's
Elevation might have it too. Yeah, right there. So 4th South will be the primary entrance into the retail. Again, we, given the location of the tracks, see this as a walkable center pedestrian access project and not driven totally by automobiles.
So can you explain to me the way in which you accommodate the level change as the entrance to the retail areas?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's actually not shown very well in any of your drawings, and it's teeny tiny to look at here. I can see sort of what you're talking about, but I'm not quite sure if I've got it right.
talk through it.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam. I think the plan view will help, but also I think the perspective will help. It's all ADA access too. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so to help accommodate that grading and stuff, because we do have quite a bit of grade change, is obviously we'll be level here with the street as far as the parking access.
Yes.
And then from there, you can branch off to these patio areas that are flush with that for ADA access. And then from those patios, there's steps down to accommodate the grade. So all your ADA access comes from this level elevation.
Okay.
And then the stairs just occur on the far ends to accommodate for the grade change.
So the thing that's called entry plaza there, how far in change in elevation is it from the parking access, and how do I do that in a ramp?
Yep, so it's all through the back here, so that'll be coming around, or like I say, depending on what retail space is in there, if they're gonna provide rear access, but they can come around and access it through the front here.
So you have ADA access through the rear only?
No, they can come around through the fronts and in through the front as well as far as the ADA access.
So the
Okay,
ADA
so the entry
stalls.
plaza is how many feet above the street? And where is the ramp for it?
So I'll double check, but I believe that entry plaza at least at this location, if you can see my cursor there,
Yeah.
is level with the sidewalk and the streets,
Okay,
and then it comes back.
and then it
Up
levels
this way.
itself out. Okay,
The building steps with the grade to accommodate the entrances that are coming off of this sidewalk there.
one of my concerns is the way in which the street level works for both pedestrians going past and also for the visual quality, that you don't have big, gigantic
Retaining walls,
retaining wall looking
Yeah.
things that,
yeah.
so I want to know how high those walls are.
Yeah, I think our highest retaining wall is probably about 24 to 30 inches high.
And those are places where you intend to have patios, is that right?
Patio area and raised planter boxes in those areas.
And are there
So-
steps to get into there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so one end will be level, and then the other end will have steps, so you can get in from both ends. But like I say, one end will have steps to accommodate the grade change.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions for the applicant?
I have a question for staff.
Sarah, would you come back up?
On the conditions of approval, number 5 says approvals for the specific items discussed and identified in the staff report. But then I wonder if those are like enumerated in this, the other 1 through 4 and 6, or somewhere else in the staff report. So it's for the items that are discussed in the staff report, and then it also has that second sentence that's for all of the other applicable regulations that are required by the city departments. So the specific items are the length of the building and the amount of glass? Just those two? So it's just kind of more broadly what's discussed in the staff report, but it does include, it's kind of the entire kind of plans as far as what's included. So it would be the items that are specifically identified as including the length of the facade and the glass. Can you think of any others? It's kind of just a general catch-all condition of approval, but those are 2 specific things that would be included. Okay, I would just want to make sure I know what what it is. I didn't recognize anything else besides those 2. I think that I haven't seen that kind of condition before that was kind of a catch-all. I think that's the first time I've seen it, so I thought it was, okay, maybe there's a list somewhere else, but there's not.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, you guys can just hang out there. And we will open the public meeting on this item. So here's a few reminders for what you need to do to participate. If you wish to speak, come to the microphone once the public hearing's been opened. State your name. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to comment. Your time cannot be combined with someone else's time. Everyone will get the same amount of time to speak so that we can ensure everyone is treated equally. If you are a representative of an officially registered, recognized organization and the item you wish to speak on is within the boundaries of your organization, you will be given 5 minutes. If it's outside of your boundaries, you will be given 2 minutes. If you have a handout you want the commission to see, you need to leave copies because they become part of the record. When commenting, speak clearly, keep your comments on topic and brief, and questions asked during a public hearing will not be answered during the public hearing. Rather, the commission may ask the applicant or staff to answer the questions after the public hearing is closed, or ask staff to follow up with you at a later time. So given the rules, we'll open the public hearing on this item. I have one card from Esther Hunter, who's chair of the East Central Community Council. come up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Is this where I'm going? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Can you hear me okay?
You can pick it up if you need to, but there you go.
Is that better?
That's
Oh,
better.
Is that too loud? Okay. Esther Hunter, I'm chair of East Central. I appreciate being able to be here today. We wrote an extensive letter that was very negative towards this project that you should have in your packet. And I'm glad to report that since that letter, we have had several meetings with the architectural firm and now also today with the owner of the property, which show promising for being able to address some of the concerns that we have. We typically do not wait till we get to a planning commission. I feel like I'm echoing like crazy. Is this okay?
You're okay. Yeah.
We typically don't wait until we're at this meeting, but we usually are working with applicants sometimes years in advance to actually talk about things that are a concern and mutual benefit for the community and for the developer. And in this case, for some reason, COVID and other things, we were not able to make that connection. So we are where we are. And we understand that some things are already in place, so we're trying to do the best we can now. In terms of the items that you've been asked to look at, I would first say that this project is directly in the middle of East Central, 4 residential neighborhoods. A transit zone is not an isolated entity. And what we see has happened with the transit zone is podium buildings where there's little activation on the bottom and there's hardly any landscape, no green space. So we know what the zoning's done, and I'm glad that planning is working on something to modify some of those design standards. But we are quite concerned with a couple of things on this project, and most of it stems around pedestrian safety and the experience for our neighborhood. When we want this to be a walkable area, the push right against 4 South does not make it a comfortable place to walk. I walk it now. It is not a comfortable place. The amount of landscape and things that can be done to add benches and make it more accessible, both also for the folks that are renting, that they have some green space to walk their dogs, et cetera, is all important. And right now, that's not part of what's required in the ordinance, but we have some concerns about that. We're also concerned that while the building is being cut up, the 400 feet on the second floor and above, for the pedestrians on the main level, there is no, it's still one big block. And retail, as we know, especially since COVID, people are not shopping the same way they were before. We have the RDA building just building away from Goodly Cookies just next to this that's still trying to rent space. The railroad building half a block away, 2 years that they've sat empty. We have a lot of retail that is not able to rent. So the hope that we can actually activate this in the way that we're talking, I have some grave concerns because retail is not the same. There is concern also from John Bolton in the Salt Lake Roaston. He's been displaced 4 times now for transit buildings. This is 4th time or 5th, maybe even. And he has some concerns about his little patio space, that the electrical items are all being placed next to the alley where his folks will be sitting, concerned about the reroute of the canal and that this doesn't undermine his building in some way. The balconies and where they sit. So we've begun those conversations. Adam and John and I met to start talking about some of these things. And again, they're not part of what's being approved today, but these are generally things we try to work out in advance. So I'm just trying to make a record of them here. I've been promised that we will, it wasn't a firm commitment, but a promise that we will work together to try and make some of these things better. We worked kitty corner on IHC. They did things like bring the sidewalk in on their property, put bollards up so that the people were more comfortable walking with little lights in them, did some green space that made it safer for people on the 4 South side. They did double rows of trees to protect the neighborhood so that there was some safety against what was happening. The other issue that we have is 9th East, is a bus stop right there. The transportation, often people get stuck in the middle of the intersection as they're trying to go into the Office Max parking lot. And with this now being this many units and an access there, there's some concern about 9th East. I know it was just approved. However, we have some realistic experiences where we're concerned about that piece, and those are the items that we had. So I'm hoping that we will continue to be able to work through some of these design things to make it a little more attractive to the neighborhood and to the folks that are walking by. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this particular item? Are there any email comments?
Not for this item.
Not for this item? Okay.
There was one additional comment that was placed in your Dropbox earlier.
Okay, did everybody get a chance to see that? Okay, that being the case, I will close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission. You've got the applicant here. Do you have any questions? Any discussion?
I just have some general comments that for the commissioners to consider. So I do appreciate you setting back that further, because I do remember us talking about that. I think, you know, a strict interpretation of the code sometimes doesn't always yield the best projects. We've seen some over-the-counter projects that are really, really missing the mark. So when I look at something that is exceeding the 200 feet in length, which is a concern to me, I really want to see how you're articulating the building, because I know through good design, you can make it feel good, like it's a good pedestrian experience. Some of the things that I'm seeing in this drawing that I'm just want to confirm that that is your intent. I think that that break and the setback along 4 South does a really good job of breaking up this as a pedestrian to feel somewhat more like 2 buildings. Setting that back further, though, helps with the safety of the pedestrian, especially that being a parking entrance and exit. So there's a little bit more room for the cars to make themselves known. So while has 2 folds, one is safety and then one is also just that visual breakup. But there's a couple of things that I want to acknowledge in this rendering that I hope you're doing. So one, I really like that there's some difference of articulation in storefronts. Some are back further, some are more forward. That gives a really good breakup versus one solid bit. I see what looks like awnings. I really encourage those types of things because as a pedestrian, those help with that pedestrian feel, and it gives the store some individuality. And it makes it feel like you have different buildings, different tenants, but different buildings. So if you have something set forward and something set back, and one has an awning and maybe one has, you know, a walkway that's covered, it feels like you're in a different space. And as a pedestrian, that's part of how that works. So I like those features, and I want you to confirm that that is your intent and that's how you're going to be doing that.
That is our intent. You referred to this other project by the Tribune building, Salt Lake Tribune. They developed that little street there.
I don't remember what it's called, but I remember the project.
We were talking about that last time, and they did a good job with the meandering and different storefronts and signage, and that is our intent here. We took that to heart. The other part that you mentioned about the 2 massing being different, we did study that last time we met, and we're changing up the colors and some of the materials on the west half from the east half to distinguish it even more, so it doesn't feel like it's all just one big building. Our intent would be to break up that mass, not only in a massing standpoint, but also in color, materiality, and the way we articulate both sides.
I think color does that to a point as a pedestrian, because you're not seeing all those colors unless you're right in front of it. What I want to acknowledge
the storefront
is
level.
The change in articulation of where the storefronts are in relationship to each other. That is, as a pedestrian at that level, that is a really nice feature. So in regards to the question of exceeding 200 feet of length, when I look at the intent of that particular part of the code, it is to break up the massing for a pedestrian to make it not feel like this solid, even if it's a solid wall of glass, it still feels solid. So I think you've met that intent really well, and that setback along the break is good. Regarding the 9th East reduction in glass, I also look at the intent of that, and I think there have been times where we have seen the glass percentage met and it's placed in a way that doesn't do anybody any good. So I think you, again, especially with your wraparound with the potential retail on that corner, are activating that site on 9th East in a way that I'm comfortable with that particular provision. So I appreciate those attentions to those components of what you want a relief from and how you've addressed them. So I really just wanted to point those parts out because I want others to know too that that's a really nice feature.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair? Yeah, I don't have a problem overall with this project, but I am sympathetic to the neighborhood's concern, the community council's concern about the amount of parking. And I just ask that one thing to consider, I know it's difficult to change the amount of parking at this stage of the game, maybe consider Zipcar as a tenant, because we have a bunch of students that live in that area that they really don't need to own a car, but they want one to get to the ski resorts once a week, or they want one occasionally to do errands. And we don't have a lot of Zipcar along that 4 South corridor, and I assume they'd pay rent for that space. So I'm just putting it out there as an option for something you could do with the parking space that might be a little more valuable than just every 1 bedroom comes with a parking spot for $50 a month.
It's a great idea.
Anyone else?
And I was going to say, not every apartment will have a stall, obviously. They would pay for it, so some may not be willing to pay for that stall.
I think the request for 435 feet compared to the standard of 200 feet it's just a huge difference. It's a huge difference. And I guess mid-block walkways are not required in this part of the city. Sarah, is that true?
That's correct. It's in the downtown plan area that they're required.
Right. When I was there today, this kind of still feels like downtown a little bit. It will be nice to have something besides a huge parking lot. Something other than that will be an improvement. But I think that's so long. That request is so far out of what is allowed, kind of. And I know that the report said that was appropriate for this block because Benyon Elementary takes up so much of the block. But Benyon Elementary is, it's on the list of schools that are considered for closure by the Salt Lake City School District. It won't be there forever. And this building will be there for, decades. So I wish that this building wasn't so long. I can appreciate that the details are made to make it feel different, but it's a long building in 2 directions.
Okay, anyone else? Or would someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Christensen.
Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve this application based on staff's recommendation.
Can I consider a friendly amendment, Commissioner Christensen? Would you like to add the conditions listed in the staff report as there were some conditions, if I recall correctly? They're not in the motion sheet, but they're in the staff report.
Question for staff, does that need to be listed?
You could clarify that, but the motion, staff's recommendation in the report includes those conditions.
Okay.
So if you want to say that, you could say that.
Okay, it's not necessary then.
In that case, I'll second.
Thank you.
I also have a friendly amendment. There are several representations of this setback from the street in the middle in this staff report, and I want it to be crystal clear that the one that is a greater setback in that break is the one that we're approving, not any of the other renditions that are actually in the staff report. I don't know if that's actually part of their set that they've put forward, and therefore this is not important, but it's important to me.
Commissioner Christensen?
Sarah, is there a page that we could reference as to which?
Oh, that's a good plan.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
So I don't have the full PDF in front of me, but it includes all of the site plans, and the elevation drawings are the greater setback. The renderings are not. Is that
Correct, yeah, the graphic rendering, so it's basically the floor plan, second level floor plan shows that setback of the 32 feet, if you want to reference.
Okay. Let me go. And is that in your
so? It's
stuff, Sarah?
It's
or
in
is it
attachment B in the plan set.
Okay.
It's on the 33
It's
feet.
up on the screen right now, zoomed in.
Yeah, but we need to reference it in the document. Screen does not help us. Okay. I'm looking.
That looks like page 40 of the staff report, or page 23 of the set of drawings from the applicant.
I don't have that.
Correct.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Yes. Yes, there it is. Page 23 of the applicant's, that's clearer. Page 23 of the applicant's, okay, so let me word this. The approval is based on the level 2 plan that occurs on page 23 of the applicant's application.
I'll accept that.
Okay, we have an amended motion. Is second okay with that?
Second is good with that?
Okay. We have a motion by Commissioner Christensen, a second by Commissioner Gent, and an amendment by Commissioner Scheer that was accepted by both. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
No.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
and the chair will also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yeses and 1 no. You got your approval. And try to get it done this time.
Amen. I'll tell my client that.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, some more. Temple Reza. Now we're getting all these. Oh. All right, we'll move on to the second item, which is 10th and Elm Apartments zoning map amendment and design review. Case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00239 and PLM PCM 2023-00092. Welcome, Lex. Is your microphone on? Is it?
Better?
Yeah.
Sorry. Get this going here. First of all, to the public, we apologize for the screen. It has been bashed and beyond our control, but the planning commissioners can see what is on their individual screens. This is a project that is twofold. It has two aspects to it. One is a zoning map amendment, and the other is a design review request. This is for a project called the 10th and Elm Apartments. The first aspect of this is a rezone of one of the parcels that is involved in this project from RB, which is Residential Business District, to CSHBD, which is the Sugar House Business District. The City Council has decision-making authority for zoning map amendment requests. The overall project is a approximately 238 unit apartment complex, and that is if the map amendment is approved. The reason this is before you tonight, you make a recommendation regarding the zoning map amendment request, but you have decision-making authority for the design review, and they're in design review because there are two parameters in the Sugar House Business District, one being the size of the project, 20,000 square feet or greater, requires design review, and or a building that is 30 feet or greater in height up to a maximum of 60 feet. So that's why you're seeing this tonight. Staff's recommending approval of the zoning map amendment and the design request with two conditions. Here is the project site. It's located just to the east of the Smiths and Sugar House along Lincoln, Elm, and 10th East. The property that is up for rezone is the 2157 parcel, which is on the corner of Lincoln and Elm, and that is the parcel where the Victorian Mansion is located. Here in this drawing, you can see the parcel that is requested for rezone, and you can also see that just a portion of the proposed apartment building will be built on that 2157 parcel, and the big bonus is the Victorian Mansion will be, for lack of a better term, saved. There's no protection on that property right now. It is not in a local historic district. It is not an individual listed site. Here are some renderings. You have these in your staff report just to show you and the public. You can see in the lower rendering how that Victorian Mansion is going to play into this overall development and be a nice amenity for this project. Here's the south elevation, and you can see kind of the shadow of the existing Victorian house. Right behind that is the rental office, and along Lincoln Street are the amenities. And I absolutely agree with you about what you were talking about earlier. That said, I'm really going to let the applicant talk about their project. But again, we are recommending approval, and based on the information and findings listed in the staff report, it's planning staff's opinion that the request meets the applicable standards of approval for a zoning map amendment and for design review, and therefore recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation regarding the zoning map amendment onto the City Council for consideration. Planning staff also recommends that the Planning Commission approve the design review request pending the property being rezoned by the City Council and subject to the two conditions as listed in your staff report. And finally, I did receive a couple of public comments today that were included in your Dropbox, so I hope you had an opportunity to those. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those for you.
Why don't we get your applicant up here and let them do their presentation, and we'll go from there.
Right, let me get them set up.
Be sure to introduce yourselves so we know who's here. And it's being recorded, so speak clearly and speak up.
Ready?
My name is David Vaughn. I'm the principal at Dwell Design Studio and also a resident in Sugar House.
You might need to pull that closer to you. Okay, now try it again.
All right, my name is David Vaughn. I'm the principal at Dwell Design Studio in the Salt Lake City office and also a longtime resident of Sugar House.
My name is Mark Isaac. I'm the owner's representative and the project lead for Argyle Development.
I'm Jordan Cummings. I'm the project manager with Dwell Design and over the project.
Okay, let's see your presentation.
Okay, so do you want to?
Yeah, let me just start off real quick, just to give you a little bit of background. We spent a tremendous amount of time with the Community Council, with the Land Use Committee and Sugar House. I think we met, probably 5 or 6 times with the Land Use Committee and the Community Council before we even provided an application into the city. We started working with the community first, which was refreshing that the applicant was willing to do that. I represent a lot of people that don't think that way. The location is unique in that it's just south of Burt Brothers Tires. It's adjacent to the Smith's grocery store. And then obviously it has this beautiful old Victorian home that's part of the project. The idea with this setting is it's unique in that it's still Sugar House Central Business District zoning and allows for the multifamily, but we're surrounded on 2 sides with Elm residential, single-family residential on the south side, and then on the east side of the building is single-family residential as well. We don't front much commercial corridor. We front along the Smith's Grocery loading docks on our west flank. But one thing that you'll notice is we did not take the 30-foot license to put before you have to recess your height. We did it after the first floor, and the idea was to do as soft a residential garden-style walk-ups on the perimeter, and then we moved the building back that 15 feet or 20 feet per zoning, but we did it after the first floor rather than 30 feet. The idea is we didn't want to encroach to the best of our ability to the single-family units on the west and the south flank. So it has a little bit of a softer feel of multifamily and mixed use than most of the projects in Sugar House, and that's by design. And then you'll see with the Victorian in the corner and the open space, when we've had an opportunity to tour the Victorian, Jordan will go into a little bit more of this answering your questions, but the beauty is there's 11-foot clears on the 3rd floor. So it's a beautiful building for amenities. We're going to use it for billiards, pool, gaming, for a collab office, co-op. We've got a cooking demonstration kitchen on the main floor and a whole host of different amenities for the residents of our project. We'll have the Victorian home and then that soft sort of old style grounds around it. And what it does is it allows for our residents to leave their multifamily unit, go into a really unique setting and still have all their amenities within the community. And subsequently, it will be preserved. It will be brought back to its grandeur on the exterior. We have to do ADA upgrades. We have to do a bunch of work to it to accommodate this kind of use, but we're really excited that it will be preserved in perpetuity. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jordan and we'll more answer questions for you.
Yeah, I would like to kind of walk through the plan, entrances into it. We do have, like Mark had mentioned, we have units that surround kind of the residential, the single family home. There's a private entrance into the garage to the north side of the project. We are currently more than 1-to-1 ratio with our parking. The plan is for the Victorian to remain and become amenity for the project. As Mark mentioned, the building after level 1 is when we do take the step back. We also took advantage of that along the boundaries of the Victorian. So you'll notice in this rendering that the sides that also face Victorian are also stepping back so that the Victorian isn't crowded as well. So it really, our goal was that the Victorian becomes the gem of the development. Moving to some of the street elevations, you have south elevation. You can see, I know Lex touched on this, kind of the gray hatch with the Victorian. This is to scale. We had the house scanned. So you can see that the building only extends 1 story above that Victorian. So really tried to
make it fit within the design. Along the east side, which is where we have single-family residents, you can see that it's all very street interfaced of walk-up apartment complex or walk-up units along that side. Our more pedestrian side is, like Mark said, towards the Smiths building.
Let me just add to that real quick, Jordan. What we did do is we put our sales center, the visitor center, and a lot of that busier activity component across the street from the Smiths loading docks. We did that on purpose to get any kind of activity, visitor parking, completely removed from the single-family residence, both on the east and the south side. So we took tremendous care in how we serviced the layout of this project, trying to be as soft a user and adjacent user to the single family as we could.
Yeah, so as Mark said, this west elevation, this is the side that this would be the Smiths, so Lincoln. This storefront that I'm kind of circling right here, that is the leasing office, so leasing would come right off of there. Loading dock as well is enclosed space. And then this entrance right here would be into the office space. So not only do we have one-to-one parking for the units, we also are accounting for parking areas for the office space that is excluded from any street parking, accounted for in the building. And then along the north side, this faces or butts up against 21 Urbana apartment complex. Here's kind of a site layout so you can see the existing multifamily, Victorian again, with the Google Earth image so you can see the streets around. That's it.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? And we can get Lex back up here too.
I have a couple questions. So on the Lincoln Street side, I question concentrating all of that. You talk about the loading dock, but honestly, where you're going to be right across from is one of the main entrances that people are getting into the Smiths parking lot. That's how I get in there. I don't go off of 21st South or 9th East. So the loading dock is, I think, misleading because it's not necessarily terribly visible from the street. It's a very small loading area. And so I think that on 10th, you have a corner with two single-family residents. One's a duplex on the corner. So you've got 3, maybe 4. If the other one's a duplex, I can't remember. I think that, honestly, like you can see in this rendering here, if you look on Lincoln, like the loading dock is parallel to Smith's building. So it's not as if it's as active as a normal loading dock. And then you have a nice screened back of the building. They've got sort of ivy and weeds, whatever, growing up it. So I question the concentrating the entrance and exit there because that is a fairly, can be fairly busy, and it has some limited visibility when you're trying to get out of the Smiths parking lot with the on-street parking. So people are just kind of driving fast, and you have some limited visibility if you're trying to get out and turn left. I'm not saying you shouldn't have an entrance and exit there, but I also think you might want to take advantage more also of spreading that out along 10th because that's not as busy of a street. And I think your primary single-family residential area that you really need to pay attention to and buffer is the whole southern side across the street. Because east of you, you have just those 2 corner bits, and then you've got that other apartment complex, and then the strip mall. So I'm wondering how you could go about dispersing some of that load so it's not fully concentrated, because it's not necessarily across the street from like an actual loading dock.
So just to clarify, most of the parking is over on the east side. There's only about 12 or 14 stalls adjacent to the Smiths.
Are they separated
Yeah, they're not connected. All the residents' parking's coming in from the east side of the property.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify, because
Amy, it was just to keep that visitor traffic off of the other side. So we thought we were doing a really creative way by the residents pulling in off one side, your visitors, your lease up, and your servicing's off the other side. And it was just trying not to contaminate both sides of it. We felt that by bifurcating circulation, we were doing a nice job. And then with what happened after we started the plan is the city came with the new plan for 2100 South, and there's going to be no cross access off of 10th. They're going to cut that. They're going to put a median in the street there. So then it becomes an even quieter circulation route for our residents to come in and out of. Unfortunately for them, it's right in and right out off of that site northbound on 2100, but I think it'll serve better for the circulation of the community.
So my next question is regarding the condition in the staff report to attach a development agreement for consideration to the city council to preserve the Victorian. And are you amenable to that?
We are not the owners of it. I can't speak eloquently to that, Amy, but I know that that's been the dialogue all along. We represented that there would be a relationship provided with the city council and a comfort level so that home remained a useful amenity center and remained in perpetuity. I just can't speak to it, but I know that they're willing to do that with the city council as part of the requirements of approval. So
I would say a relationship and a development agreement are two vastly different things. And I would be comfortable in this particular instance forwarding an actual wording that it was a development agreement. The city council is the ultimate decider, but that is an extremely well-maintained residence, and it has been my entire existence in Sugar House. So yeah, I would be really, it would be really important that we word something to the city council for a recommendation that is strongly advises that we do what we can to ensure that that home is protected. It is not dilapidated, it's not fallen down. So I think preserving that is a key interest to your project, as you've mentioned, but also to the community and to that relationship to your single family residents on the south side, because that will break up so much of that scale and keep that greenery. And if you tore that down, I would probably figure out how to haunt you.
well, I think everybody would, and it's nobody's intention. In fact, we're spending a tremendous amount of money upgrading it. ADA, it's not ADA compliant. There's a bunch of stuff we have to do to it. A lot of the exterior work will go back to its original grandeur. They're excited to have this as their it's a differentiator for leasing and for residents in Sugar House, because none of the other projects have an amenity center in a circumstance like it. So I think that in good confidence, Amy, they'll be working with the city attorney's office to get some kind of documentation in order that everybody's comfortable with. But I'm very comfortable with your recommendations as such. It's been represented to us on the design and delivery team from the get-go that it was saved. So it would surprise me that they wouldn't be able to do or willing to do the same.
Okay, those are my questions for now, Madam Chair.
Just to be clear, the existing carriage house and whatever that little garden building, both of those will be torn down.
Correct, and Commissioner Scheer, the carriage house is an automotive paint shop, and it actually has environmental stuff that we have to clean out of there. There was nothing in there that warranted saving. It's literally been converted into an automotive paint shop, and no one knew that. We didn't. So yes, that will all be removed.
Anyone else? Okay, hang tight. We'll move to the public hearing on this item. First up is Judy Short, and as a representative of the Sugar House Community Council, you can have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Judy Short, and Mark's right. We've met with him maybe 1 billion times on this project. The project meets the purpose of the master plan and the Sugar House Business District 1 and 2 zones. The only difference really between the zones is height. We're in favor of rezoning the RB lot to provide some continuity. We asked for information about how the buffer spaces for the two zones help the project if they're both the same, but the drawing we got didn't clarify a thing. Parking is always a problem. The former Liberty Village has always said they have extra parking in their building, and I think that's because everybody was parking on Elm. So I know we don't have such thing as a neighborhood housing parking permit system that works anymore, but this would be a very good place to talk about that. And I second what you say about the Victorian house. Will kill you, Mark. We've been lobbying for many years to have 10-foot wide sidewalks be the standard in Sugar House. This is now codified in the ordinance. Mr. Isaac wants to pretend that didn't happen and ask for 5-foot sidewalks for this project. First, because the existing sidewalks on 10th Elm and Lincoln are 5, and he should be allowed to do the same. We say no. We didn't discuss this for so many years, and Amy can help me remember how many years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We've been talking about 5-foot sidewalks aren't wide enough in Sugar House. We finally got it passed, and this is not the time to overturn that on the first project. We have many new apartment buildings that are going to come before you. They're all in Sugar House Business District 1. And I am not in favor of any of those having 5-foot sidewalks. But if we set the precedent here, it's dangerous. The other option is to just deny the rezone. The other issue that's not at all clear is the new landscaping requirements and how that will affect sidewalk width and the width of the median. We think it's important that we have street trees throughout the business district, and we don't want them planted surrounded by rocks or concrete, or even the fake grass. I heard a blip on the radio today that said some huge number, like 40% of the plastic in the ocean is artificial turf. We do not want to add to that. So this is the perfect time to clarify what the standards are with a 10-foot sidewalk and a median and places for trees and a little bit of grass or rocks or bark, whatever you put. So we can set the tone for the future buildings to come, all of which are in the business district. If all these can be provided along with the development agreement concerning the parking and now the Victorian house, we approve this project. There are also other comments attached to my letter. And I apologize, I know my letter was late in coming, so I hope you all got it and read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Schwartz.
I'm Lynn Schwartz. I would like to speak to the request to reduce the sidewalk width from the zoning required 10 feet to 5 to 7 feet as delineated on page 73 of the staff report. I find it extremely disturbing that one of the first major projects after the zoning was revised to require wider sidewalk widths asked for this width reduction. The rationale for this references the Sugar House Master Plan Business District Design Guidelines Handbook, which asks for 6 to 8 foot widths. I want to emphasize that the zoning was changed to require wider widths because 6 to 8 feet was found to be insufficient in promoting pedestrian-friendly environments. This is why the wider widths are now required. I also find it extremely disappointing that, according to the applicant's narrative, both the planning staff and the planning director felt that reducing the sidewalk widths to even less than the original design guidelines was good, appropriate, and complies with the zoning now in place. I would also have appreciated it if the applicant had put this major request in any of the narrative regarding the other zoning change and not have the only mention of it be on page 73 of the staff report. If this is granted, this will be only the first of width reduction requests.
Thank you. And I have a card from Rebecca Davis. Come up and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
I'm Rebecca Davis. I am supportive of the requested rezone for the historical building that's part of the 10th and Elm project. Regarding reducing the width of the sidewalks around the exterior of the project from 10 feet to 5 feet, I am not in support of this. The sidewalks need to remain 10 feet wide to allow pedestrians with dogs and/or children to pass each other comfortably and remain on the sidewalk. 10-foot sidewalks are now required in Sugar House, and this project should be required to follow the 10-foot sidewalk ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the cards I have. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Anyone? Are there any emails on this item? No emails? Okay.
Madam Chair, I just want to point out, the chair of the Sugar House Land Use Committee referenced a letter that she suggested should be in our report, and I don't see it.
Was it in the
I'm not seeing that letter.
Was it in the report or was it in the Dropbox?
Maybe I just haven't refreshed recently enough.
Received no letter either.
You did not receive the letter either. Judy, we aren't sure what happened to it.
You could email it from your phone in the next, say, 30 seconds.
Could you do that? Email it from your phone? Oh, okay. Okay. I know it's a technology thing, right? I'm sorry we don't have your letter in our information. Okay. All right, seeing no one else that wishes to speak on this item, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Questions, comments for the applicant or staff?
I have a question for staff. Where in the staff report does it talk about the sidewalk width? I don't think I have 73 pages.
So the discussion of the sidewalk width is on page 72 and 73. It's criteria N. And
My staff report only has 46 pages. That's the 28th page. Oh.
Is that the actual page number or the PDF page number?
The PDF page number.
Or maybe it's
It's actual page number 22.
Correct.
I didn't notice it either, like it's not outlined in the overall kind of thing.
So I'll pipe in. I think, you know, I can't think of the word. Your interpretation of that particular standard is, I think, open for discussion to the commission. In that the Sugar House Business District guidelines were written well before the new ordinance that came out that listed 10 feet sidewalks. The community has been pushing for larger sidewalks for at least 15 years. And so those two things are going to be incongruent just on nature. But I think that the interpretation that this is more of a residential and the 10-foot sidewalks were really focused along the main streets of Highland and 21st. I understand your point, but I do think that this is a more trafficked area than is being given credit in the interpretation, and there's really only residential, like single-family residential on the south side of Elm, and then those little dead-end streets. Otherwise, we've got some major apartments all along Elm and 10th. We have a strip mall. We've got a lot of actual walking, and we have the streetcar right off of Elm. So there actually is quite a bit of foot traffic that is coming up Elm from 9th East. And that's where you're cutting through to get to Highland, to get through the new Elm divide. And as that building comes online that got set back by the fire, there is a lot of pedestrian activity with the streetcar, with Fairmount Park, and with all of the other things that are going on 21st South and that. So I think it warrants a look from the Planning Commission to decide if this area is really more of a residential nature, or if it is part of that extension of the Sugar House Business District, and fostering more walkability. That, you know, we want to look at the widths of those sidewalks. Where we have narrower sidewalks, you cannot get two people walking. You just can't. You get somebody with a stroller or whatnot, and you gotta like pull off to the side to let them go. So I think this is a discussion for the commission that's worth having and looking at how this was interpreted, and if we think that's adequate. I think a 5-foot sidewalk in this area is not adequate given the nature of its walkability, and it's part of the business district.
Can I add a couple things to that?
Of course.
Sure.
So,
not really.
You cited a couple documents. There is another one, the Sugar House Business District Circulation and Amenities Plan, and that looks at sidewalk widths along 21st South, Highland, 11th East, McClellan, and 11th East. And so the McClellan map shows, and that's the one closest to this project, it's literally a block away, that appropriate sidewalks for that area are 5 to 8 feet. So that's part of that rationale too. The other consideration, there's a couple other considerations. One, the park strip there is extremely narrow. And in talking with the planning director, we felt that it was more appropriate to have a narrower sidewalk and a park strip with trees, because that's required, than another sea of concrete. So that was part of that consideration too. And the other thing that I think that these guys would raise is there is a very nice, it's not wrought iron, but it is a wrought iron-like fence that completely surrounds the Victorian complex that I know that they want to maintain, and I think it's worth maintaining. So those are a couple other factors that came into that recommendation.
Thank you, Lex. I would also note that the streetscape amenity plan was very focused in its review of what it looked at, the locations it looked at, in terms of how it was looking at circulation. And, you know, this section of the Sugar House Business District 2 was not included in that focus area for the circulation and streetscape amenities plan. It was very focused on McClellan, 21st, and Highland. So I don't know that that rationale like bleeds out enough for me, because I know this area wasn't really part of that. And you will see that McClellan has undergone a vast overhaul. And that was part of that focus, because we had these existing sidewalks. That streetscape and circulation amenities plan came at a time when a lot of that hadn't been, or some of it had been developed already and some of it hadn't. And so the overhaul of McClellan was really a reflection to those narrow sidewalks. We're not going to have the ability to overhaul Elm and 10th and Lincoln in the same fashion. So and in reflection to the comment of like a narrow park strip with trees, I totally get that. But I think we can have larger sidewalks and then include trees in that. So you still have, you still have a more inviting way to walk. And then you can still have trees, but you may not have this narrow park strip, which is going to be rocks and then a tree, rocks and then a tree, because that's what we saw in McClelland.
It is grass now.
Yeah, but it's going to end up being rocks. And as a pedestrian, that is the antithesis of then being able to like move off to the side for the person with the stroller, because now you got an area with rocks.
According to our new landscape requirements, the park strip has to have a certain amount of plant material. So,
right, that certain plant material will be the tree.
And just for clarification, those landscaping amendments have not been adopted.
Of course, but eventually,
maybe
probably by the time this one gets built.
I think that staff has brought up a lot, not only in the interpretation in the staff report, but also just now, a lot of things for us to think about and discuss. And I think it's worth a discussion from other commissioners and not just pretending that it's not an issue.
Okay, if we look at what happens if we require a wider sidewalk, I think the alternative to what we're seeing here is that you do get concrete from the curb to the front, the very front gate, very front edge of this development. That's what you'll get.
Or they have a little bit less massing.
Right.
I hate
Which
to
is
do
a
at
complete
this stage.
redesign of the project to take 5 feet out of the
I do hear
width
that.
of the project, would reduce the number of units.
I hear it's a big ask, and it makes me uncomfortable. At the same time, 5-foot sidewalks. This neighborhood is problematic with the traffic in it right now. In my view, it's sort of not good for pedestrians, and it's not good for cars right now. And anything we can do to kind of make it more pedestrian friendly and change that equilibrium, because I don't care which particular street it is, we just need more people accomplishing errands on foot.
I agree that it would have been great to have laid down that rule very early, but the director has discretion to move off of this standard, and he did that. So to come back now when the applicant has already had that decision made by the director is a problem. I don't know what kind of problem it is. Maybe our attorneys can help us with that, but that is...
We are the ultimate deciders here. I understand that staff provided a lot of discussion with them, but we do have actual authority.
I think that the rule actually says that the director has discretion on this. So we can look that up, but I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that this is a discretionary item and why it's not before us as a decision. It is not before us as a decision. I mean, we can decide to delve into it, but that's why it's not one of the things that we're deciding here.
Design review is one of the things we're deciding, right?
Yes, it is.
And that design review includes the reduced setbacks, correct?
I'm at a loss. I don't know.
Sidewalk width. So let me read that section of code for you, because Brenda, you're correct. And what it says is that modifications, and it talks about the sidewalk width, modifications to this requirement may be approved by the planning director if in compliance with the adopted Sugar House Circulation and Streetscape Amenities Plan or its successor. And so that's why I was referring to that plan.
And let me just add, just from the applicant's perspective real quickly, we were trying like heck to not look like McClelland. I represent both sides of McClelland coming up in the near future. Thackeray on one side, Vitek on the other. You're going to see new stuff coming, and they can't stand the McClelland changes and all the concrete. And it's not made that street soft and pedestrian and bike friendly. It's increased its capacity, but it's awful looking. And all we were trying to do was maintain a little bit of the old character that surrounds the Victorian with that green space and that scale. And we didn't mean to get sideways or create conflict. It's just we felt this was a unique location and a unique circumstance, and we didn't want concrete to concrete. And that's literally the reason for how we designed it and how we laid it out. So.
So I have a question then for staff. If, say, the width of the sidewalk was increased to like at least 8 feet, well, I guess my question is what is the width of the narrow park strip, if that is incorporated into the sidewalk, so that it's not encroaching or making the project be redesigned?
What is the width of the park strip?
Yeah, because you said you want a narrow park strip with trees versus a wider park. So what's the width of that park strip?
3 feet, maybe,
So that would yield us an 8 feet sidewalk.
if it was concrete.
And we could still incorporate trees in that.
If that is your
Not well.
prerogative, you don't have to convince me.
I know, I'm looking at you, but I don't.
Commissioner Barry, how would we incorporate trees?
I mean, you see trees downtown. They have wide sidewalks, and then they have a big tree well, and they have the sidewalk with it.
So in like the center of the sidewalk, essentially.
I don't know where it wants to be designed, but it can be incorporated. It doesn't have to be wall-to-wall concrete. You can still have that tree because we see that's how it's done downtown. It doesn't have to have a park strip to have a tree, is my point. So if you took that narrow park strip and added it to the sidewalk, you would not be adjusting any part of the design of the application. You would merely be using the public right-of-way with that park strip and increasing the width of the sidewalk, and then still keeping some landscaping with trees with it, which I think is doable.
I would not be in favor of that. I think that there is an argument to be made that this is a more residential and single-family-ish place, since directly across the street are some lovely cottages, some that are there with nice yards and all this. It's a little bit, I mean, there may be a little bit more traffic, but I don't think it's worth tearing out the park strip and the trees and everything just to sort of follow the form. So I'm tending to agree with the director's discretion on this one.
I'm sympathetic to the community saying we worked really hard to get 10-foot wide sidewalks, and this is the first project that's under that rule, and now it's being accepted, which I am sympathetic to that and the arguments that Amy is making as well. I wonder if there's a way, there is a difference between grass with trees on it and that park strip that just would be rocks, like hostile architecture, right? So you can't walk with your dog over that part. Is there a way to say that the park strip needs to be grass? Separate from, because I know when you're saying like a percentage of greenery or vegetation, like the tree canopy counts. So you could have rocks and trees.
Let me just make one additional comment. So along my street, and I live in a mixed area with some apartments and single-family homes, there is a section of the sidewalk on 12th East that goes from 5 feet and it widens out to 8, and it's wonderful as people walk. And there is no park strip. And from somebody that lives in that area, I always wish that the entire sidewalk was that wide. And it's a residential area, so having a narrow sidewalk doesn't make it feel more residential, especially in an area where people are walking, and people are walking their dogs, and people are out with their kids. Having a little bit more width on that sidewalk is really inviting. And that's from personal experience on the road right around from my house. So, I don't know that we can mandate that it be grass and how the city then is like, hey, your grass is dead. Are you going to get it going again or whatever? What I have seen in the business district, especially along McClellan, is that park strip was trees and rocks. And that becomes the preference because it's easier to maintain. It's cheaper. And then I don't see how the city can then keep enforcing that it be grass. So I just don't know the answer to that, but I know what we end up getting is rocks. And if you think about how you interact with with an area. And so I'm thinking about how I interact with the business district when I walk around. Those narrow sidewalks, and then with the buildings as high as they are and closer to the sidewalk, that is what makes you feel like it's not as inviting and it's not as safe and it's not as great of an experience. So while, yeah, the community has been working on the 10-foot sidewalk, it was because we know how this area has been interacting and how we've been interacting with the area and how the sidewalk width is a big part of that. So I'm more along the lines of like, hey, how can we extend the sidewalk and not impact the actual application or the applicant's design so we don't encroach on their setback, but we take advantage of that right of way that is most likely going to end up being like rocks.
We have to also acknowledge, and I think it's a great design attribute that the applicant has done, which is to pull back the mass of the building on the second floor and above, so that really as you're walking along, you won't feel a 6-story high wall. It will be a 1-story high wall, and that is a more residential scale. So that's, again, I think the director made the right decision.
Commissioner Carlson, you've been trying.
And I'm ready to make a, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to jump in and suggest that we make a motion on the zoning portion. So yes, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you.
Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve the zoning map amendment and include a development agreement in order to guarantee the preservation of the existing Victorian mansion currently located on the 2157 South Lincoln Street parcel.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Christensen and a second by Commissioner Berry. And this is just on the zoning map amendment. Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So the zoning map amendment passes now.
And I will make it, go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of revisit Commissioner Berry's question of the sort of park strip versus sidewalk. I wouldn't have kept the Victorian mansion, but I never see value in historic preservation, so I realize I'm a minority. But I do notice in this rendering how much green space there is. So when I think about like the motivation for a park strip, this building already has shade, right? The building itself is going to shade the sidewalks in the summer. And we're adding a lot of green space by allowing that Victorian mansion to stay with all that green space around. So to me, this development looks like it has enough green space. At least park strips in my neighborhood, what happens is the bushes get overgrown and you get even less sidewalk. That's my issue with park strips. Anyway, so I think I'd be in favor of Commissioner Berry's view that we make it all sidewalk so we have a wider sidewalk.
Isn't the park strip issue a zoning recommended approval of?
No.
But I think that there's
that's where the 10-foot sidewalk thing applies, is in the zoning.
Correct. If there's that section of the zoning ordinance does refer to the planning director and give them discretion to modify that. I don't know that you can necessarily override that as part of just a design review application. You might be able to do that as a condition of the zoning amendment. So that might have to be reopened if you're inclined to add conditions to the zoning amendment. But the design review itself is for the specific items that are being discussed, not necessarily the sidewalk, because that decision is up to the planning director.
So that is correct. When I was looking at the standards, I thought I was in the design review standards. So that was, I want to rescind my second. I don't know. I mean, I would be open to opening that up again. That was an absolute oversight, and I wish that had been brought out, that we were in the zoning map amendment standards with section N.
No, that's not correct.
Well, on page 22 of your standards,
right.
it is the zoning map standards.
Yeah, it is the zoning standards.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Scherer.
Thank you. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve this application based on staff's recommendation with the 2 conditions in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Scherer and a second
I'd like to make a
by
substitute motion.
Commissioner Christensen. What's your substitute?
No, Barry.
Barry?
I'm not Mike.
No, he made a second.
He made a second, but I would like to make a substitute motion.
Okay. Sometimes you have to go in order. Now, you want to make a substitute?
Yes. Okay, hold on. Based on the information presented and the discussion, I move that the commission approve this application based on staff recommendations with the following modifications. That the design review include an increase of the sidewalk to 8 feet.
I'll second. Oh, I don't know if I can second a substitute motion.
Yes, you can. It does need a second.
I just did it. I did it.
Okay, there's a substitute motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Burrows.
Commissioners, if I may,
Yes.
that was an element of the guidance that the director was providing, that this condition cannot be attached to the design review approval. It could only be attached to the zoning map amendment approval. So if you want that to be a condition, it needs to be as part of the zoning map amendment, and can only be a condition to that approval.
Okay. Would you like to withdraw your substitute motion for this portion?
So I want to make a comment. I'll withdraw the substitute motion for this this particular component, but I am dismayed that you didn't bring that up to us prior to the zoning map, knowing we were having that discussion, and that was, I think that now I feel like I wish that had been brought to our attention prior to us moving on the zoning map amendment.
Okay, let's take care of the design review right now. Are you withdrawing your substitute motion for the design review?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so
You can absolutely reopen the zoning map.
Yeah, well, let's try to do one thing at a time here. Design review. We have a motion by Commissioner Scherer and a second by Commissioner Christensen. Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Scherer.
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So the design review is approved.
So, Madam Chair, I would like to move that we reopen our previous motion for the zoning map amendment.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Barry.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Gent will second that. So we'll reopen that discussion on the zoning. Thank you. I'm running out of space here. Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Scherer.
No.
Commissioner Christensen.
No.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote no. 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses, and 1, 2, 3 noes. So we'll reopen the discussion on the zoning map amendment.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the Commission recommend that the City Council approve the zoning map amendment with a condition that we enter into a development agreement for the preservation of the Victorian house on the corner of Elm and Lincoln, and when the additional condition that we extend the sidewalk to the include the parking strip for a wider sidewalk.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Barry, a second by Commissioner Christensen. Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer.
No.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 2 noes. The motion passes. We'll forward that recommendation to the City Council.
I just merely said to include the parking strip. So whatever we've
width there
reported
is.
that it's 3 feet, but we don't definitively know that. So I said just to include the width of the parking strip for a wider sidewalk.
Madam Chair, may we take a 5-minute recess, please?
Thank you, Commission.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Resume. Or we'll be here all night. Okay, we're going to move on now to the next item, number 3, which is the zoning map amendment at approximately 1720 and 1734 Southwest Temple, which is case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00380 and PLN PCM 2023-00106. Welcome, Diana.
Good evening. Sorry, I wasn't on. So this is a zoning map. Wow, it is echoey. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah, this new system is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a zoning map amendment and a master plan amendment for both properties. This is the vicinity map. 1700 South is just to the north of these two properties. They are contiguous. They are on the west side of West Temple Street. The request is to rezone properties for both properties at 1720 and 1734 Southwest Temple from R1 5000, which is a single-family residential zone, to RMU 45, residential mixed use. The subject properties are approximately 0.48 acres combined. The subject properties are located on the west side, as I mentioned, of West Temple Street to the south of 1700 South. This area is part of the ballpark area, although it is not part of the ballpark station plan area. So on that note, the ballpark station area plan does not recommend any changes to this area, obviously, because it's to the south of 1700 South. 1700 South is a major corridor road. West Temple Street is a collector road. 1720 South has an existing single-family dwelling, and 1734 has an existing non-conforming duplex. There are no development proposals at this time. The applicant has indicated possible residential commercial mixed use, but that is not known at this time. The recommendation, based on the findings and analysis in the staff report and factors to consider for zoning map amendments and master plan amendments, planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for both applications regarding this proposal with the following condition: that the applicant enter a development agreement for the replacement of at least one dwelling unit on 1720 South and at least 2 dwelling units on 1734 South to comply in a satisfactory manner with the housing loss mitigation standards of the ordinance. And on that note, I do want to let you know that a housing loss mitigation plan was prepared for this application. When a property includes residential dwelling units, such as both these properties, within its boundaries, an application for a zoning change that would permit non-residential land uses cannot be approved until a housing loss mitigation plan is approved by the city, and that has been done. That's at the end of the staff report. These are the two properties. The one on the left is 1734. This is a 2-level duplex, unit on top, unit on bottom. The picture on the right is of 1720 South. That is a single-family dwelling. Both of these are rentals, and they are rented at fair market price. I'm going to jump ahead because I think a lot of the controversy tonight is going to be, or the opposition tonight is going to be based on this. This is Ordinance 14 of 2016. This started back in 2013, to my knowledge. On August 26th of 2016, an ordinance was adopted that changed the zoning for 155 individual properties located in the area between 13th South and 2100 South, and between Main Street and 200 West to the west. Most of these properties were between 1300 South and 1700 South. Only 8 were located south of 1700 South. The zoning for these properties was changed from RMF 35, which is a moderate density multifamily residential district, to the current R1 5000, again, single family residential. The ordinance was also amended for the Central Community Master Plan future land use map by identifying these 155 properties from medium density residential to low density residential. I've tried to show this. Oh, you're probably not going to see it, but you have it. The map on the left is the future land use map. I've tried to blow it up, if you will, to the picture on the right. So the circled properties are, so at the top, these are the 6 that are closest to 1700 South that were rezoned to the R1 5000. And then this one is 2 properties that was rezoned. You're not going to be able to see the other one, at least the public won't, but the next map shows the properties that were rezoned, and you can see that the cumulative of those properties is between 1300 South and 1700 South. Again, the photo to the right just highlights those 8 that are south of 1700 South. Most of the properties south of 1700 South around this area are labeled on the land use map as medium residential mixed use or medium density residential. By remaining labeled low density residential on the future land use map, the subject properties are no longer compatible with the surrounding uses. Most of the development and the current zoning are designated for higher densities. The master plan should be amended to show these 2 properties as medium density residential to allow for future multifamily and/or mixed-use development potential in order to make the subject properties more compatible with the current uses around them. The city policies and plans that staff looked at, of course, the Housing Salt Lake City Plan. The goal here is to make progress towards closing the gap of 5,500 units of deeply affordable housing and increase the supply of housing at all levels of affordability. Plan Salt Lake also addresses the city's need for housing as needed, access to a wide variety of housing types for all income levels, providing the basic human needs for safety and responding to changing demographics. The potential for this development, again, the applicant does not have an intended use proposal for this property at present. However, in discussions with the applicant, he is considering a medium density residential development like the existing development to the north, the CW urban development. Since the subject property is less than half an acre, there will be limitations on the buildable area put on the development proposed for it, which would keep the scale of the building compatible with the adjacent developments. For a residential proposal, parking and heights would be restricted due to fire codes and zoning ordinance requirements. For commercial uses, any alcohol-involved use, a tavern, a bar, would be prohibited since it is abutting a park directly to the west. Any development under the RMU 45 zoning will require at least 20% of the lot to be maintained as open space area. So again, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation for both applications, the master plan amendment and the zoning map amendment, with the one condition. The applicant is here. He does not have a presentation, but is willing to answer questions.
Okay, you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Larson Sequist.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant or staff at this time?
I have a question for staff. So this zoning map is what a mishmash of zones.
Yes.
What is the zone for the CW project on the corner?
It's the same that the applicant is requesting.
It's RMU?
RMU 45, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, just hang there. I will open the public hearing on this item. And I have a card here from Amy Hawkins, the Ballpark Community Council Chair. You'll step up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and you'll have 5 minutes.
What if I held the mic?
You can hold it, yeah.
That would be much better.
There
you go. Okay, thank you. On behalf of the Ballpark Community Council and its neighborhood residents, my name is Amy J. Hawkins. I serve as its chair. I'm here to report to the Planning Commission that the 5 members of the board of the Ballpark Community Council voted unanimously against supporting this proposed zoning map amendment. As mentioned, these 2 parcels are included in the portion of West Temple. Actually, this wasn't mentioned. These 2 parcels are included in the portion of West Temple that's currently under consideration for the 300 West Corridor and Station Area Plan. But what was mentioned was no development plans were submitted or presented to the neighborhood with this application, so there was no way to talk with neighbors about evaluating the proposed rezone for any kind of community benefit or housing loss. And so I'll repeat what another resident wrote to express today. It's premature to even consider spot zoning. We hosted a conversation with city planner Diana Martinez and the property owner at our April 6th Ballpark Community Council meeting, which we held over Zoom. Our meeting had 82 attendees, and that portion of the meeting lasted about 15 minutes. At that time, you might remember, we were all really concerned about flooding, all flooding everywhere. At our meeting, I regret that we didn't make more of an effort to present to our fellow community members about the Ballpark Neighborhoods Downzoning Ordinance from 2016, which did rezone 155 parcels in the neighborhood. Luckily, our long-serving board member, Jeff Sandstrom, was attending the meeting, and when the question came up, he knew specifically that the downzone to low-density residential did specifically apply to these 2 West Temple parcels in question. As more and more apartment buildings are proposed for our neighborhood, both affordable and market rate, our neighborhood becomes increasingly dense, and it has a demonstrable need for more infrastructure and community benefits. You're already aware that we have issues with community safety in the past 5 years. Total crime in Ballpark has increased by 34%, and the increase in Part 2 crime is even more striking. That's an increase of 43%. And your planners, right? I can imagine some of you might be thinking, this is the argument to add more density and override the neighborhood's wishes to maintain 155 parcels as low-density residential. But if merely adding eyes on the street in the Ballpark neighborhood was enough, then the many apartment buildings that have been built in our neighborhood in recent years should have naturally addressed our community's safety issues and decreased our crime statistics. Jane Jacobs, who coined the term eyes on the street, recognized the role of neighborhood stakeholders. People who've moved into the neighborhood and rented for a year are not ready to describe themselves as stakeholders, and that's about 29% of our neighborhood currently. I hope that astonishes you. 29% of our neighborhood has lived in Ballpark for less than 12 months. In other words, to quote my fellow board member, Fraser Nelson, Ballpark's new and incoming high-density housing is, well, so far the vast majority of it is rental, which, although very helpful for the city's housing crisis, does not add to the stability of our neighborhood. I argue we need to plan for that stability. By going through the 300 West Corridor and Station Area Plan process, which will apply to these parcels and this entire segment of West Temple from 17th South to 21st South, we hope the city can address some of the deficits in the Ballpark Station Area Plan, which apply to the Ballpark neighborhood from 900 South to 17th South. The ballpark neighborhood is underserved in terms of open space. It's labeled as a high-need area in Salt Lake City's Parks and Public Lands Needs Assessment from April 2019. We're underserved in terms of urban forest canopy, both in the public right-of-way and in private space. We have 2.4 park acres for 6,000 residents, and our tree canopy coverage, measured by census block, matches the lowest category in the city, 1 to 11%. The results of that are the health disparities that you should expect. A noticeable measurable heat island. When surface temperatures were last measured by census block in Salt Lake City, they matched the highest in the city and ballpark, 118 to 121 degrees Fahrenheit. And our asthma issues are higher than the city's average.
Thank you. That's your 5 minutes. Stop. Why? Technology. Okay, the next card I have is from Jeff Sandstrom. Step up, introduce yourself, and you will have 2 minutes.
My name is Jeff Sandstrom. I'm one of the board members of the Ballpark Community Council. I was on the board when we pushed this down zone through. I'd just like to make a couple of statements about it. The purpose of it was to maintain the original core of the residential homes in the neighborhood. By design, we purposely left off the perimeter streets for the downzone proposal, such as 1700 South and Main Street, leaving those open to higher density development. Really, the main idea was to protect the backbone of the residential homes being on West Temple and going east and west on the interior streets of the neighborhood. We felt like that was appropriate size and scale management for the neighborhood to have the interior still protected with its historic residences. So it was worked on for about 3 years by residents, and former chair Bill Davis spent a lot of time and effort on it with a lot of community input. So I had already submitted an email to you. I'm not going to mention any items on that. I just wanted to add a few more comments. And I would urge you to maintain the existing down zone on these properties. Thank you.
Thank you. The next card I have is Paul Svensson. Again, introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Paul Svensson. I own 4 properties on 17th South within 2 blocks on either side of this property. And I was so excited when I saw this on your agenda, because I think it's exactly what this neighborhood needs to do. I think it's exactly where this city needs to go. Think about where this parcel is. It's on West Temple, important arterial street that leads straight into downtown, and 17th South, which every single one of us drives to go to Costco and Target. It's a very big street. It's also midway between 2 really high-use track stops. It's a 15-minute walk either south or north, 5-minute bike ride either way. And it's 5-minute walk to a bus stop that feeds straight up 17th South and ends up at the U. You take all that into consideration. Does it make sense to have 3 housing units on a half acre? Boy, if we can't get moderately more density in those conditions, we are really in trouble as a city. How are we ever going to address our housing shortage? It literally seems inconceivable. Now on the down zone, it's true that these properties were down zoned. Is that a down zone that you would agree to now, knowing what we know about the housing situation? I'm certain you wouldn't. At least not on West Temple. Jefferson Street, Major Street, Richard Street? Okay, we can leave those little single-family houses. Maybe that makes sense to keep it duplex. But on West Temple and 17th, we need to be moderately more dense. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a card here from Jesse Bazell, who it looks like he wants me to read his comments. You're going to go, okay. Introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes.
Sorry, first timer, didn't know what the card meant, so I just filled it out.
Okay, that's fine.
But it's cool, I got it. I'm Jessie Bazell. I am a resident of the Ballpark neighborhood. I live in those CW properties that we've talked about a lot, just north of the proposed rezone. I would just mimic a lot of what Amy and Jeff said, and really it all kind of boils down to, it seems a little preemptive. I'm all for change, growth, happiness, but there are some real concerns when it comes to high density parking, etc. So for me personally, I think we'd be way more excited to talk about a rezone and dig into it had we have a proposed plan and something we can actually kind of put pen to paper and understand what's actually going to happen to these properties. But that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? I didn't get it, but you're welcome to come up and introduce yourself and speak for 2 minutes.
Thanks. My name's Ernest Lloyd Cox. I live at 1746 South West Temple. That would be within throwing distance of this place. I also served on the Ballpark Community Council at the time that the down zone was approved and solidified. We were assured that that was part of a master plan and that our tree-lined streets and yards and so forth would be preserved as much as possible. I would like to say that I think if you vote on this at this time, you're voting blind. You do not have a plan. We do not know what we'll be getting out of this situation. I can tell you what we've had. In recent years, we've had to call the police on a drug ring. We've had to call the police on a organized crime situation at 1734 South, where they were stealing from your garages on the east side and having yard sales next door to me on West Temple. I've been threatened by residents of that rental who were skinheads and tattooed and selling drugs, that they didn't want me walking in front of their house. I am the Neighborhood Watch block captain, and I have encouraged everyone on that neighborhood to watch that house very carefully. I also like to say that for the most part, during the day, it's a beautiful street to walk up and down. It's a long, beautiful walk. Unlike Jefferson and Major Street and some of the others, there are very short walks. We're one of the last tree-lined streets where you can walk your dog for half an hour. And I'd like to try and keep it that way. It means a lot to me. We've paid off our house and stayed there because we love it. It's a beautiful place, and the residents who have been there for 10 and 20 years alongside me will agree. One of them sent me an email. His name's Cody Carver. I forwarded it to Diane. He is opposed to this zoning change, as well as I am. And I don't know what else to say. We have suffered the loss of a lot of trees on our tree-lined street due to development. We've endured many problems, but I think for the most part, it was designed originally and in an excellent manner and should maintain that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there someone else? Step up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Ashley Gomez, and full disclosure, I'm not from Ballpark. I'm from the west side, like Glendale area, and the stories that I'm hearing about Ballpark, I mean, I really resonate with that just because we've been seeing these projects going up. First, the zoning before the actual plan of a project. Now, we don't know what these projects are until they're too late, and then they're already passed. And you say that they are mixed income, they are housing for everyone, but I am sorry, there is a need for a certain demographic and a certain range of financial status of folks in this community that really do need housing. And I think I agree with everything that folks in Ballpark have said, and I would personally too like to see a project in full detail before things do move forward.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Are there any emails?
Yes, there is one email that you have not been provided, so I'm going to go ahead and read it into the record. It's the email referenced by Mr. Cox from Cody Carver. It says, to whom it may concern, my property at 1755 South West Temple will be directly affected by the proposed rezoning. We are already experiencing parking issues on West Temple due to the new townhomes on the corner of 1700 South West Temple. Along with the other new townhomes being built to the east and west on 1700 South, we are already experiencing a high volume of new residents in the area. As the owner of the property at 1755 South West Temple, I am strongly against any rezoning of the proposed properties. These should remain as single-family homes in order to preserve the integrity of this neighborhood. Cody Carver.
And that's all? Just the one? Okay. Seeing that no one else wishes to speak, I will close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission.
I have a question for staff. Are these parcels part of the Ballpark station area plan or any other station area plans?
They are not. They're part of the Central City Master Plan.
And the Central City Master Plan was amended when the downzoning happened, correct?
Correct. It was, it's not in the published copy, but it is in the ordinance that it is low density residential.
Any more discussion?
I am not in favor of this proposal. I believe that it is not compatible with the current Central City Master Plan as provided for the downzoning. I believe that the downzoning was a way that the community had of drawing a line in the sand about where they wanted to preserve the residential, the low-scale residential. That entire street, as I went down it today, is pretty much all low-scale residential off of 1700 South itself. If this property were indeed on 1700 South, then I would definitely be in favor of a rezoning. But at this time, not even knowing what we can expect from this particular project, I think it is not only premature, but unnecessary in order to fulfill the master plan.
So I concur with Commissioner Scheer, but in a slightly different capacity in that I think that when you don't have a project before you, then I have to look at the comparison of what's allowed in the zone now, what would be allowed in the new zone. And I think to preserve, you don't necessarily need a single family residence to preserve some of that feel of a tree-lined street, but I think you need a little bit broader setback than the RMU 45 has, a minimum of 5 feet for the front yard. And I think that's problematic. And there may have been a different zone without a project that I might have been more comfortable with, and comparing what those two allow for some more density in those parcels, but with a broader setback to preserve to preserve that feeling of a tree-lined street. Because I love West Temple. I think West Temple is one of the best streets in our city. Without a proposal, I can't evaluate or try to modify that setback because we don't have anything to evaluate. So,
Whenever we get a request for rezone, I like to see that table about what's allowed now with the current zone and what would be allowed with the new zone. Following in Amy talked about that, and I was like, oh, let's figure that out. And the things that are allowed by right or conditional uses in the proposed zone don't seem appropriate for that neighborhood right now. So I think that's a reason why I would say the zoning that the suggested or requested new zone is not appropriate for those two parcels right now. So I'd make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Scheer. Oh, it was Commissioner Burrows.
Surprise. No, because what is it? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Commissioner Burrows is going to let me make the motion.
Yield my time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay,
I'll
Commissioner
make a
Scheer.
motion.
Excuse me?
This is for the master plan amendment.
Yes.
Based on information presented and discussed, I move that the commission recommend that the city council deny this proposal for a master plan amendment for the following reasons. It's inappropriate without a plan.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Tuttle. Do we have a
I
second?
would like to make a friendly amendment to that, to add other reasons why it is not appropriate. Let me get my notes out, please, because it is, to be more specific about the inappropriateness. It does not conform to the Central City Master Plan, which downzoned the area deliberately in 2016. It is not compatible with the neighboring uses, and it also, since we do not know what's going to be, we do not know whether it will preserve the neighborhood.
Are those changes acceptable? Okay, you'll accept the changes. Do we have a second for the amended motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Burrows? Okay, we have a second by Commissioner Burrows. Commissioner Gent?
No.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen?
No.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Berry?
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 2 noes. We'll send a negative recommendation.
We have.
Come back with a plan.
Motion?
We've got another, that was just the zoning amendment portion.
Oh, there's a second. There's a second vote. Okay.
Amendment? Or, yeah, zoning map amendment. Based on the information presented and discussed, I move that the commission recommend that the city council deny this proposal for zoning map amendment for the following reasons. Because it doesn't conform to the Central City Master Plan of 2016.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Burrows.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Tuttle will second. Commissioner Gent?
No.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen?
No.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Berry?
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 2 noes. Again, we'll send a negative recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the last item, which is the Thriving in Place public hearing. There's no PLN numbers, so Angela.
I appreciate your time on your agenda again this evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. And Brian, are you able to load my slides?
David.
Sorry, I don't know why I called you Brian. Well, he's getting that set up. Just real quickly, what I was planning this evening is to just do a really quick summary for you guys, and then provide answers to some of the questions and comments that you guys asked at the June briefing, and then hopefully receive a positive recommendation this evening. With that, I will get started, and if you guys want me to go dive deep into any of the, don't hesitate to ask. So, what I wanted to just talk about is we've had, as you may recall, phase 1 to phase 2 of Thriving in Place. Phase 1 was community engagement and data analysis, and phase 2 is where we're at right now, which is the policy development of the plan. The key takeaways from the data pressures are high and Salt Lake City getting worse. This is impacting many people in many areas, but disproportionately impacting there. There are no affordable neighborhoods to move to where displacement is not happening. There's not enough housing overall and a severe lack of affordable units. You guys have seen this will be coined, and this outlines 22 that will be completed over the course of we have a 2-year action plan that pulls out specific strategies, and then some of these are items that the city's already doing, and some of these are things that will within the plan, you can see the contact steps and who will be the partners, the schedule, and resources. I'm hearing that my mic was not on YouTube, so there we go. So, now you can hear me much better. And it's echoey, as everybody's been alluding to this evening. So the plan is really the roadmap of what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few years. And as I indicated in June, the intention is for some of these items to be coming back before the Planning Commission. For example, the community benefit policy that will be amending up to 5 different sections of the city code. So each one of these 22 policies, some may be things that we're already doing that we're going to be refining. Some are already working. How they're working, we'll put more funding or more resources towards it. And then some are new programs and policies that will either come before the Planning Commission or they'll go before the City Council for a resolution for policy adoption or for budget appropriations. We've discussed the housing loss mitigation, but I'm certainly happy to dive into that a little bit more. We didn't receive a lot of public comment during the 45-day engagement period, and I credit that mostly to the engagement that happened in the development of the plan. We had over 2,500 people engage with the creation of the policies within Thriving in Place. It's one of the biggest initiatives that we've had within the city, and I'll get into the summary of the comments here in a minute, but we did a lot of outreach during the 45 days. We went to community fairs, we presented at community councils, we did online surveys, social media blasts, and we did receive some public comment, but most of it was generally in support of the plan. As I mentioned, the 2-year action plan is what our roadmap is for the next 2 years. We've already received guidance from the City Council in a briefing earlier this year to start working on some of these items, knowing that the plan wasn't adopted yet. And we also have successfully procured almost $25 million in the mayor's recommended budget that was passed by the city council for initiatives within Thriving in Place. Here's a summary of the community feedback. So we've had about 1,500 unique visitors to the website in May and June, and 29 completed the survey forms. Generally, we had strong support for the actions, and especially for more affordable housing and tenant support. There was a desire to see more quantifiable goals, and Commissioner Scheer, that was something that you raised with us specifically. That was added to page 14, and I just want to pause on this for a second because it was a really good point that you made in the briefing in June. And I think when we initially started the work with Thriving in Place, the intention was knowing that we were going to be replacing our housing plan, Growing SLC. And the two plans, as you've heard numerous times as Rudy was here briefing you on Housing SLC, the two plans are really married with one another. The engagement that happened with Housing SLC was really dovetailed with Thriving in Place. And while Thriving in Place is in a housing plan, a lot of the policies within Thriving Place are focused on housing. So we took the housing plan and created quantifiable goals within Housing SLC that tie to Thriving in Place. And admittedly, I don't think that we've done maybe as good of a job as we should have in communicating that. So we've added some additional context to the draft plan that really creates that nexus more. It's challenging because Housing SLC has been adopted already and Thriving in Place is in the adoption process. So I think when the two documents blend together, that will be more apparent. And you'll certainly see those goals and action items coming before you in your staff reports as the planning staff will now be analyzing displacement factors and bringing those factors before you in their staff reports for your consideration when considering rezones or general plan amendments. The other thing that was clearly communicated to us both in the community council meetings and in some of the public comments is that there was a desire to see more publicly owned lands used to create affordable housing. And I followed up with various entities within the city. We have an inventory of all of our public assets. I think there's a perception that we own more things than we actually do, which is unfortunate. I think the city certainly would love to own more property to be able to put into the pool of affordable housing. We are getting ready to go to RFP for several of city-owned properties that will likely contain housing along with open space and some other things that you've heard many times about Fleet Block and some of the other big properties within the city. We certainly are always looking at opportunities to be able to use our publicly owned assets for the public benefit, whether that's affordable housing or open space. The redevelopment agency, the RDA, also has that charge within their bylaws of looking at their properties as well for those. And one of the best ways that we can get affordable housing within the city is certainly when we can partner with developers on a land deal. So those are things that we are focusing on, and it's an initiative of the mayor as well. So just wanted to flag that, and that was called out a little bit in more detail in Priority 3D. Again, just creating more of that nexus between Housing SLC and Thriving in Place. And I'm not going to go through all of the numbers here, although I'm certainly happy to. But you can see where we have the 4 goals that were within Housing SLC. And down below, you can see the policies within Thriving in Place that tie to each one of those goals. This was added to the draft plan, again, based on the feedback from you, Commissioner Scheer. We had some feedback, and I think this was really consistent throughout the development of the plan, is for more continued outreach and engagement. We did a lot of unique engagement with this plan, and that's really accredited to the University of Utah City and Metropolitan Planning students who actually won an award for the work that they did on Thriving in Place. They held youth workshops, and they really engaged people within our community that often don't have a voice, and they engaged them within their community. And so we were able to get real life stories of how displacement is impacting people in Salt Lake City rather than anecdotal stories that we hear. I think one of the other things that we've heard a lot is that the plan, there's so much there, it feels like a lot to bite off, and it feels very wide and expansive. And so we added a graphic overview of the 2-year action plan, and the intention of creating the 2-year action plan was for us to start tackling some of these really big policies within Thriving in Place, looking at what we need to what policies will make a difference as quickly as possible, and one of those being the community benefit policy. You guys have housing loss mitigation ordinance reports coming before you frequently, and I know that's always a challenge for the Planning Commission, for the planning staff, and so that was one of the things that we wanted to really tackle quickly so that we can mitigate the loss of any more residential units within the city. Again, I just want to thank our community working group. We've had a very diverse group of people helping us course correct over almost the past 2 years, ranging from community advocates to developers. We have had a city interdepartmental working team with almost every single department within the city represented. And then we've also had a policy team that has helped really kind of dig deep into these policies. So I just want to give a moment of gratitude to all of those who've spent countless hours with us over the past 2 years in the development of this plan. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the content, and if not, I can move into the answers to the questions from the June briefing. Nothing?
Congratulations. Great job.
Thank you. So I wanted to just go into a few of the questions that you guys asked us in June, and I believe we captured everything, but if I didn't, feel free to chime in. So one of the commissioners asked about the funding in the mayor's recommended budget and what those sources were. So as I mentioned, we have almost $25 million that was passed in the budget this year. And that $25 million comes from various funding sources, including Funding Our Future, the general fund, RDA, tax increment financing, our housing and urban development annual allocation, and program income from loan repayments. And just a quick summary of what those dollar amounts are. So $180,000 in tenant relocation assistance. This is going to be a pilot program. This is separate from the community benefit policy, but this would be, I think the applicant that came before us tonight is a really good example of that, where if those individuals were displaced from those 2 houses, they could come to the city and request tenant relocation assistance, which it would include moving costs and a rent stipend for a few months. The a little over $92,000 for a tenant resource center. One of the things that I think is really going to be impactful about Thriving in Place is it focuses on tenants in a really major way, that we have a lot of barriers at the state. And so we've really worked in Thriving in Place on how we can help tenants within Salt Lake City, knowing that we have some preemption issues. So we're really excited to launch the Tenant Resource Center and provide a landing pad for people who are experiencing displacement within our community. They can access resources. They have almost like a case manager type advocate helping them. We haven't developed what this is going to look like yet, but that's some of the things that we're envisioning. We have over $13 million in helping tenants become owners. This is the shared equity policy. This includes the perpetual housing fund that's before the city council and an appropriation to NeighborWorks Salt Lake. And then there's also just a general appropriation that will go to shared equity that hasn't been allocated to a specific project yet.
Angela, can I stop you on the perpetual housing fund? Mm-hmm. I imagine there will be far, far more people that apply for this program than this can fund. How will we select the lucky winners?
You know, I am not able to answer the specifics on that, but I'm certainly happy to look into that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this fund, and I have a lot of concerns that this is sort of helping a very small number of people a lot. And I guess I have concerns about whether this is the most efficient use of public money, because it seems like I have a lot of concerns about this. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I haven't been involved at a deep level on the negotiations with a perpetual housing fund. That's an RDA project, but I'm certainly happy to look into that and see if they've identified what that process would look like, and I can get back to you on that. We have almost $9 million for acquiring and rehab unsubsidized housing. This is work that the RDA already does, where they purchase different buildings and put them out through their NOFA for developers to do adaptive reuse or redevelop. And then we have about $2.6 million for making ADUs easier and less expensive. The RDA is working on this project that will consist of going out to bid for a consultant to determine what an ADU program could look like within the city. The work that the Planning Commission and City Council have done earlier this year on changing the ADU standards have really helped fuel the funding request here and remove some of those zoning barriers that we see. This also provides for 2 FTEs within code enforcement to help with short-term rentals, which I know was a concern that Commissioner Burrows raised, and I'll address your other concerns in a second. So all of that is really great news that we already have some of this money flowing to these policies. Commissioner Gant, you asked about the right to shelter policy in New York, and I reached out to Andrew Johnston in the mayor's office, who's the mayor's homeless policy advisor, and he said that New York is the only city which he is aware that has a right to shelter ordinance that was enacted in about the 1970s. We in Salt Lake County and in Utah use local motels as our de facto shelter for overflow needs. That's become increasingly challenging since COVID because a lot of the hotels have gone out of business or have been sold. And so we're struggling to be able to find as many hotel vouchers as we used to be able to have. And then we also have funding constraints at the state level as well on that. So more to come there. I think it's something worth looking into, but that was the feedback that I received from Andrew. We had another comment on home ownership and that we wanted to make sure to promote that. That is a priority of the RDA board, the mayor, and it's also a priority of the legislature. A lot of the policies that we're working on right now are really focused at the state level on providing more home ownership opportunities. So we're also working on we've been having conversations on restructuring that $50 million that President Adams was able to get appropriated this year so that we can use that money within Salt Lake City. And so we've been having those conversations to see if there's ways that we can look at using a community land trust or if we can somehow partner to be able to utilize our funds to back some of that, backfill some of that money so that people within Salt Lake City can utilize those funds. We had there was another question on city-owned properties, which I answered. There was, I appreciate your email on the state code change, and I apologize, I think I misunderstood your question last time. So we can use the website language for internal accessory dwelling units. It can't be the sole source of evidence, but we can use it. Our code enforcement has about 75 cases a year of short-term rentals, and they're all complaint driven. So we haven't been proactively, just because of staffing and bandwidth issues, we haven't been proactively being able to enforce on short-term rentals, but that may be able to change now that we have these extra 2 FTEs. Short-term rentals, both within the city and at the state level, are of high concern. And I know there was the Kempsey Gardner report on short-term rentals throughout the state, and Salt Lake ranked, I want to say it was about 2% of our housing stock, but if you go on any sort of online website, you can see it's much higher than that. And so I think there's going to be a lot of policy conversation continuing to happen around short-term rentals, and I believe, and I could be incorrect, that you said you wanted to participate in that. Is that correct?
Maybe that was somebody else. Okay. I thought so. I remembered being in a meeting, and I thought it was maybe you that mentioned that you would like to weigh in on that policy. So, and then Commissioner Scheer, I hope I addressed your comments on the quantitative components of Thriving in Place. And with that, I believe that those are all the questions that I had from last meeting. If there are other questions, I'm happy to entertain those for you.
I've got a question. How much money is available for property acquisition?
Right now there is, and this was the number that the RDA gave me. So the RDA is the entity within the city that does most of the property acquisition, although parks and others do as well, but 8.8 million.
Okay. I asked the question mainly because of the discussion that's been taking place about the schools that Salt Lake City School District is going to be closing, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And should not those properties be prime targets for the city to acquire? Because they are in primarily residential neighborhoods. I know Newman School, which is near me, is totally within a city block, has no street exposure to it, would be a perfect place to develop some housing. But it's a property acquisition opportunity for the RDA and for the city.
Yeah, and I know those conversations have certainly been happening. I think it would be great if we could get a first right to purchase on those school properties, or at the very least.
Don't we have something like a eminent domain?
I don't believe
we'll just come and get it and give you what it's worth.
I don't believe on school properties.
Not for redevelopment.
I have a follow-up question to that. So if the RDA is the driver for property acquisition, are they constricted to only acquire property within an active zone? Or can they acquire property throughout the city?
I believe they can acquire property anywhere within the city, but I believe tax increment financing can only be used within their RDA project areas.
So I guess you may not know the answer to this then. Is the RDA looking at acquiring property throughout the city? Because if they are, then they lose not only the tax increment collection, but I don't know, maybe they don't lose it, but one of their key drivers is then negotiating loan terms that are favorable to more affordability.
Yeah,
and I don't know if they're restricted to that in a zone, an active zone either. So I guess I'm just questioning if the RDA is the sole driver for property acquisition, is that too limiting?
I don't know the answer to, I'm not in the RDA. They're a completely separate entity within the city. So I'm happy to follow up with Danny Walls, the RDA director, and ask that question. I know we do some property acquisition in other departments within the city, but it's not my area of expertise. So I feel like I'd be misspeaking, but I'm happy to follow up.
I didn't expect you to have those answers, but that question brought up the notion if they're driving it, is that the most appropriate entity within Thriving in Place SLC to kind of default to?
Yeah.
Because I think also listed in here is having housing throughout the city and not concentrated. And if they're limited to active zones, then they're very concentrated.
Yeah, so I do know, like our housing stability division, for example, owns properties that they put into the community land trust. We have some properties within community and neighborhoods within the admin team that are within our portfolio. So I don't believe that the intention is for them to just be in project areas, but for us really to look at acquisition.
Yeah, no, I think that's what I'm trying to say is your intent is definitely broader, and I don't know if there are restrictions if the RDA is the primary driver for land acquisition for housing. Is that the best partnership if they're limited in certain ways? And Danny Wells might say, no, we're not limited at all, so that might be fine. But I think those are questions to consider if the RDA is the primary motivator for property acquisition for what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I do know that the housing set aside that is required through state code, I believe it's 10% in state code, but I believe cities, dependent upon how they set up the project area, it might be higher. And that housing set aside can be used throughout the entire city. So it doesn't have to be used within a project area. So that's how a lot of the, like you may have been hearing about some of the housing initiatives on the west side that the RDA is working on. And that's specifically around the inland port. They're able to use housing money throughout the entire city, and even able to focus it in certain areas of the city, like mitigating some of the impacts from the inland port.
I just want to follow up on this idea of what property the city acquires. I love the idea of looking into the schools. I just encourage the city to look hard at all property it owns in every district, including the golf courses. We just heard from Ballpark about how little green space they have, and they have, to the extent we have affordable housing, it's being concentrated there. And we have a lot of high opportunity neighborhoods that I don't think are really doing their part in terms of meeting our affordability goals. In fact, I think some of them are actively not helping us meet our affordable housing goals. And so I just look at every resource, don't take anything off the table in terms of whether that is the highest and best value for our stated goals as a city of that land.
Thank you. Anything else for me? Happy to entertain any other questions. I'll get the answers to a few of these things I didn't know. I apologize. I don't want to speak for the RDA and misrepresent what their goals are. So.
Absolutely, and I didn't expect you to have the answers. So thank you for the follow-up. That will be great.
Thank you. With that, I would I would ask for a positive recommendation from the Planning Commission this evening, and again offer our gratitude to you or all the time that you've given us on your agendas over the past 2 years. I know this is an initiative that's incredibly important to the mayor. It was something she took on right when she first took office, and it's also something that's important to the council. So we appreciate your consideration over the past 2 years. You've been so gracious with your time with us. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Just hang right there while we do the public hearing. Then you can answer some more questions probably.
Great. Thanks.
I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. The first card I have is Alicia Seeley. So step up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Alicia Seeley. I'm really sad that I missed the public comment period for this plan, but I was really, really excited about it. I was excited to read the Thriving in Place draft of the plan. And I'm really heavily in support of a lot of the recommendations that are set forth. I just have a couple of, if I could add a couple of things, I would. I do have a couple of concerns that some of these recommendations may not be enough to adequately address some of this gentrification, displacement, and the creation of more affordable housing. So I only have time to address one in 2 minutes, but here it goes. The Thriving in Place plan emphasizes the missing middle housing problem and expresses goals to provide a wider variety of housing typologies, but I feel that there's some gaps that the plan does not address to make this happen. One of these is zoning regulations, specifically large minimum lot size requirements in a lot of residential zones throughout the city. The Thriving in Place plan only recommends zoning changes in the RMF 30 zone, which is already zoned for low density multifamily homes, and this makes up a pretty small portion of residential land in Salt Lake City, and it feels a little bit as if the plan is to say we want to accommodate middle and lower income housing families, but only concentrated in a few areas. And I would really urge the plan to take a closer look at minimum lot size requirements in all single and multifamily housing zones throughout the city, as this is a really exclusionary policy which exacerbates the affordable housing shortage, and reducing some of those minimum lot size requirements as well as looking at some other zoning regulations will not only help to create a lot more affordable housing units, but will also help create more walkable, inclusive, diverse, and visually interesting neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. The next card I have is Lynn Schwartz. You know how to do it. I mixed the cards up.
My name is Lynn Schwartz. As I have said in previous comments to the Planning Commission via the Sugar House Community Council comment procedure, this is an excellent plan for both the present and the future and should be adopted without delay. We need to have a city where people of diverse economic circumstances can live, work, and yes, thrive. Unfortunately, we are rapidly heading down a path where this is becoming impossible. The Thriving in Place plan, if fully implemented, would make such diversity a reality. The question remains as to how much and how soon it can be done. This plan would require a lot of money, much more than Salt Lake City or county can provide. The state must be brought in and soon. Since this means a longer process, what can be done now? Some help for tenants can be implemented now. A major increase in funding for keeping tenants from being evicted by using one-time grants can be done now. A requirement that landlords notify tenants of tenant help programs before an eviction process is started would be a great help, and that can be done relatively quickly. And a gratuitous comment. We are discussing the future of the city, and there is nobody here, and that makes me want to cry.
Thank you. And last but not least, I have a card from Judy. Step right up.
I think Angela's done an amazing job with this whole thing. And every time I try to dig into it to understand it, my head starts spinning after about 10 pages. So I can't say I've read every single section. And I love the placemat. That sort of helps me get focused. One thing Nick said today was there's actually nothing in writing that says the process for making a master plan change or the process for making zoning changes. And we're actually going to get some of those things written down. This is going to expand housing for tenant support and affordable housing. That $25 million is peanuts. You've heard me say before, it takes 200 or 300,000 just to build one apartment unit in this town. So that's what, 50 houses or 50 people? It's not very much. But there's some other good things that I really like. The demolition permit fee, which is probably, I'll guess, $300 per permit. It's going to go up sky high. That money ought to all go into the housing fund. And I feel like the one best thing about this is that finally we're focused on the prize, rather than having 72 different this and that's working on stuff, but it's not coordinated. I think, assuming we keep our eye on the prize, we might get something done. And I'm going to advise that you don't get caught up in what I call the transmittal queue. And I don't know if you guys ever looked at that, but it's when things get approved by you, and then they sit in this long, long list for 2 or 3 years, and maybe they get popped out to the city council. This one needs to get popped out in the morning. You know, keep it rolling. Don't stop the action, because people are ready to go. But if it sits in that queue, they're going to be on to other stuff. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Judy. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Okay, seeing no one, we'll check for emails.
There are 2 emails that were received earlier today, and they were provided to you in your Dropbox files. One is from Cindy Cromer. The other is from Bill Tibbetts. Bill's email references an op-ed that he wrote that was featured in the Deseret News today. But rather than reading through all of those, I just want to mention that they were there and they were provided to you and will be part of the record.
Thank you. So I will now close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission. More discussion or A motion for a recommendation?
I want to make a comment on, one of the things that was brought up was the minimum lot size, which I think we've talked about in my 5 years here, has come up periodically. But maybe this is a question for the acting director, because I feel like the zoning part needs to be, can't be, like they can't rezone that stuff. Like that has to be driven from planning, correct? It could be like listed in Thriving Salt Lake of like you should look at this, but they can't drive that particular change.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
To the public comment about changing the minimum lot size.
Oh. Yeah, that would be driven by, there are certain people that can initiate petitions, the planning commission, the city council, the mayor. So it would be up to one of those bodies to initiate those, and then we would process those.
Thank you. I just wanted
the
to
affordable housing overlay also addressed minimum lot size issue.
As I understood it, only as part of the inclusionary zoning, not.
Well,
I believe, Commissioner Berry, that we would be free to add, assuming we want to recommend approval of the plan.
No.
Can I just finish the?
Yeah,
I think we could suggest that as part of it, council and the mayor revisit our minimum lot sizes as examination. I believe that would be within the scope of our it's only recommendation anyway. We don't have to have like a comprehensive, we think this should be the minimum lot size, but.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. My impetus in making the comment was merely to address the comment and to try to provide some conclusion and clarity to it, but absolutely, I hadn't gone that far that you were suggesting, but it is an appropriate time to do that if you wish.
Well, I should say that the affordable housing, what we used to call it affordable housing overlay, and now it's called affordable housing, I can't remember, which has not been considered by City Council yet, but it's on their agenda in the pipeline of doom. Does include exceptions to lot sizes if you include affordable housing in your project. So since what we're talking about is affordable housing, I think that at least partially addresses some of those concerns. I would like to...
Madam Chair, could I have a moment of privilege?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, as she mentioned that, I wanted to go back and look up that specific strategy. And I think her comment is really valid that we shouldn't just be looking at one zoning district. The plan calls out RMF 30, the zone changes that you guys adjust, the Planning Commission and City Council. I guess I don't remember for sure if the City Council passed RMF 30. I know you guys have. They did. Okay, thank you. As an example of a type of zoning change that we've done that we could do in other zones throughout the city. And affordable housing incentives is another thing that's mentioned several times throughout Thriving in Place and is also its own specific strategy. And as Commissioner Scheer alluded to, that would also reduce minimum lot sizes, setbacks, and allow for increased height and density for exchange for affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Scheer?
Can I make a motion?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because this is the point in time where we get funny, and that's not good. So, based on the information presented and discussed, and the discussion in the public hearing, I move that the Commission recommend that the City Council adopt Thriving in Place as the city's anti-gentrification strategy and mitigation plan, and as an addendum to Housing SLC.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Scheer, a second by Commissioner Christensen. Commissioner Berry?
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer?
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Gent?
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. You get a unanimous recommendation for approval.
Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate all of your time over the past few years. Your feedback has been invaluable. I think this plan is going to have a really big impact on our community, and your hands are on that. So I hope you go home feeling good about that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other business? Seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you all.